The moment I started noticing the cracks in my marriage to Mia was as mundane as it was startling. It was a Wednesday evening. I had come home early from work, balancing 2 grocery bags and a bouquet of daisies, her favorite. I stepped through the door to find her in the kitchen, phone in hand, smiling at a message she quickly swiped away when she noticed me. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice light, masking the twinge of unease. "Just Karen," she replied without hesitation, referencing her closest friend. She leaned in for a perfunctory kiss, her lips brushing my cheek, the warmth absent. Life with Mia had always been comfortable, even easy. We met in college, and while I wasn't the guy she initially had her eyes on, I was persistent. I was the one who stayed when others faltered, who built the life she wanted. For 15 years, I believed I had won her heart for good. But that smile I caught her giving her phone, it wasn't for me. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house fell silent, the unease lingered. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan spin, her breathing steady beside me. She was peaceful, untroubled. And yet, something about her serenity put my mind in turmoil. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe it was the stress of work making me read too much into things. But the small signs continued. She became protective of her phone, the device rarely leaving her hand. Her laughter, once spontaneous and full, grew stifled, as if she was carefully weighing each reaction. And then there were the late nights. She'd always worked hard, but now she stayed late at the office with increasing frequency, the glow of ambition replaced by something else, something unspoken. The tipping point came one Sunday afternoon. We were at a park with the kids, our daughter Ava pushing her little brother Sam on the swings. I offered to grab coffee from the nearby stand. When I returned, I saw Mia sitting on a bench, her phone pressed to her ear. The way she spoke, quiet, intense, her lips curling into that same smile I'd seen before, made my chest tighten. As I approached, she ended the call abruptly. "Who was that?" I asked, my tone casual despite the knot in my stomach. "Work," she said, slipping the phone into her purse. It was then I realized I couldn't ignore my instincts anymore. Something was wrong, and I needed to know what. The following week, I began paying attention to details I would have overlooked before. Her phone bills, for one. Mia wasn't tech-savvy, and she didn't bother with paperless billing. The first thing I noticed was an unfamiliar number that appeared far too often, with calls lasting late into the night. My heart sank. But it wasn't proof. Not yet. I resolved to confront her, but I wanted certainty, not accusations that could be dismissed or explained away. I started small, checking her social media, subtly observing her interactions. And then I crossed a line I never thought I would. I peeked into her phone while she was in the shower. What I found wasn't subtle. Messages filled with inside jokes and pet names. Plans for secret lunches and weekends away. The sender? Greg, a man I had once called my friend. The betrayal hit like a freight train. Greg had been around for years. He was harmless, or so I'd thought, a buddy from work whose jokes were always too loud but whose loyalty seemed genuine. I'd even invited him to family barbecues, handed him beers, and laughed at his stories. And now I was staring at undeniable proof that he had been sleeping with my wife. I didn't confront her that night. The anger was too fresh, and I needed clarity. Instead, I reached out to a private investigator, someone I'd found online who promised discretion. Within days, he delivered the kind of evidence I could never have gathered on my own, photos of Mia and Greg meeting at a hotel, their closeness unmistakable. It was more than I needed, but it wasn't enough to quench the storm brewing inside me. They were planning a weekend getaway, Mia had told me it was for work. The audacity of it fueled my resolve. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. I wasn't just going to ask for answers. I was going to take everything she thought she had control over and show her what betrayal really felt like. The next morning, I watched her pack for her business trip. She moved through the house with ease, humming softly as she folded blouses and scarves into her suitcase. When she caught me watching, she gave a small smile. "Don't worry," she said lightly. "It's just a couple of days." I nodded, feigning acceptance. Inside, I was already dismantling the life we had built together, brick by brick. Mia left for her so-called business trip on a Friday morning, carrying the same suitcase she used for family vacations. As she kissed me goodbye at the door, the scent of her perfume lingered, a floral sweetness that now felt cloying, a mockery of the trust we'd once shared. She smiled, a flicker of guilt hiding in her eyes, or maybe I imagined it. Either way, she turned and walked out, leaving behind the life we had built. I didn't wave as she drove off. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I sprang into action. I wasn't the kind of man to let betrayal simmer. It had to be addressed decisively. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. Confrontation left room for excuses, half-truths, and manipulation. No, I had something more permanent in mind. First, the locks. The locksmith arrived an hour later, his toolbox rattling as he worked efficiently to replace every lock on the house. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, feeling the weight of each turn of his wrench. He didn't ask why the sudden need for new locks, and I didn't volunteer an explanation. By noon, the house was fortified, a clear line drawn between Mia's past and the future she would no longer be part of. I packed a suitcase for myself and the kids, tucking in the essentials for a short trip to my parents' place a few towns over. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me the space to enact the rest of my plan without them around to witness the fallout. Next, the accounts. Mia had always trusted me with the finances, another small victory in the battle of appearances we'd called marriage. By the end of the afternoon, our joint accounts were frozen, her credit cards deactivated, and the utilities transferred to my name. Every financial thread binding us was cut clean. The last step was more personal. I'd always been a meticulous man, a planner to the core. I'd spent the last week compiling evidence of her affair, photos, emails, phone logs, even a printout of the hotel reservation she had made with Greg. I wasn't just going to expose her to me, I was going to expose her to everyone who thought they knew her. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. Mia and Greg's weekend unfolded just as the private investigator had predicted. They checked into the luxury hotel under aliases, but the photos I'd arranged to be taken left no ambiguity. Mia, laughing as she held Greg's arm in the lobby. Greg, leaning in too close at the dinner table. And later, the two of them entering the same suite. The evidence felt like a hammer in my hands. Every photo was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I knew. But the final blow was still to come. I called her workplace first thing Monday morning. I didn't speak to her directly, that would have been too easy. Instead, I reached out to her HR department, explaining that I had documentation of an inappropriate relationship between two employees, including details of how it had breached company policy. I emailed them the evidence, every damning detail neatly organized into folders. I didn't ask for confirmation. I didn't need it. By the end of the day, Mia's career would be in shambles. Next was Greg. I didn't bother with subtlety. I waited until he was at his garage, a greasy, chaotic place where he worked on cars and pretended to be everyone's buddy. I walked in, the envelope of photos tucked under my arm, and waited for him to notice me. "Kurt," he greeted, a little too warmly. "What brings you by?" I handed him the envelope without a word. His smile faltered as he opened it, his hands trembling slightly as he sifted through the photos. The color drained from his face, and when he looked back up at me, his expression was equal parts shock and fear. "You've got two choices," I said, my voice steady. "Leave town quietly, or I make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. And by everyone, I mean your wife, your kids, and every client who's ever trusted you." His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. I turned and left, not caring to see which choice he'd make. Either way, his life as he knew it was over. Mia came home that evening to find her key no longer worked. She knocked on the door, confusion evident in the rhythm of her taps. When I didn't answer, she called my phone, her voice thick with irritation. "What's going on, Kurt? I can't get inside." I let her stew for a moment before responding. "I think you know exactly what's going on." There was a long pause. "Kurt," she said softly, the edge of guilt creeping into her tone. "Can we talk? Whatever this is, we can fix it." I almost laughed. Fix it? After everything she had done, she thought this was something we could patch up like a leaky faucet. "I'm done talking, Mia. Check your email. Everything you need to know is there." I hung up before she could respond. The email I'd sent her was curt and final, a list of what I knew, what I'd done, and what would happen next. The attached files left no room for denial. Hours passed, and I didn't hear from her again. She didn't knock on the door or call. Maybe she went to Greg, hoping for some semblance of comfort. Or maybe she realized she had no ground left to stand on. As I lay in bed that night, the house silent and the kids safe with my parents, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I had dismantled the life I thought I wanted, but in doing so, I had reclaimed my freedom. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming of betrayal. The morning after Mia's fruitless attempts to contact me, I woke to an inbox flooded with messages. Emails from her, desperate and pleading. Texts, alternating between apologies and anger. Even a voicemail from her mother, asking what had happened and if we were okay. The storm I had unleashed was only beginning to make its presence known. I ignored the messages for now. There was still more to be done. My first stop was the lawyer's office. Jennifer Pratt, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking no prisoners, had agreed to take my case. I had sent her the evidence a week earlier, and she'd been working quietly in the background to prepare for the divorce. As I sat in her office, going over the final steps, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "You've got this," she said, sliding a stack of papers across the desk. "The evidence you've gathered will ensure custody and a favorable division of assets. Mia's actions speak for themselves." I nodded, signing where she indicated. "What happens next?" "She'll be served within the next 48 hours, Jennifer said, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Then it's just a matter of letting the system work." That was all I needed to hear. Mia's first real confrontation with the reality of her choices came that evening when the divorce papers were delivered to her at work. I'd chosen the timing deliberately, ensuring her colleagues would see her reaction. According to the private investigator, she had been escorted out of the building shortly afterward, her face pale and her hands trembling as she clutched the papers. Later that night, she called. I let it ring. She tried again and again until I finally picked up. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice a venomous mix of anger and despair. "You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything, Mia," I replied coldly. "You did that all by yourself." Her tone shifted. "Kurt, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end like this. I love you." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare say that. You don't destroy someone you love." She sobbed, but I didn't let it affect me. I was beyond tears, beyond grief. "The papers are with you. Sign them. We're done." "I don't want a divorce," she whispered. "Please, Kurt. I'll do anything." "Anything?" I asked, my voice low and cold. "Then here's what you can do, pack up your things and get out of my house. There's nothing left for you here." The line went silent. I hung up, my chest tight but resolute. The fallout from her affair spread faster than I had anticipated. Greg's wife, Clara, reached out to me after discovering the photos and messages. Her rage was palpable, a mirror to my own from weeks ago. We exchanged details, piecing together the timeline of betrayal. Clara revealed that Greg had been using their joint savings to fund his escapades with Mia. She planned to file for divorce too, and I supported her however I could. Meanwhile, Mia's friends began distancing themselves. Word of her actions had circulated, thanks to Clara and a few choice leaks. The carefully curated image she had maintained, devoted wife, loving mother, respected colleague, crumbled under the weight of the truth. One evening, I received a call from her best friend, Karen. I had no idea, she said, her voice thick with shock. She told me she was unhappy, but I never thought she'd do something like this. I didn't have the energy to rehash the details. Now you know, I said simply. And now you can decide if she's still the person you thought she was. Weeks passed, and the legal process marched forward. I stayed with my parents during the transition, ensuring the kids had as much stability as possible. Ava, my oldest, began asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Where's Mom?" she asked one night as I tucked her in. "She's taking some time away," I said carefully. "But you and Sam will always have me." It wasn't enough, but it was all I could offer. Mia tried to see the kids, but I kept the interactions minimal, supervised, and brief. She couldn't face them with the truth, and I wouldn't let her feed them lies. The final blow came when I sold the house. It had been our home for over a decade, filled with memories I couldn't bear to relive. The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I didn't tell Mia until the sale was final. Her reaction was explosive. "How could you sell our house?" she screamed over the phone. "That's the kids' home." "It stopped being their home the moment you destroyed our family," I said flatly. "They'll have a new home, a better one, free of lies." Her sobs were the last thing I heard before I ended the call. On the day the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift. Mia didn't attend the court hearing, opting to sign the papers quietly in her lawyer's office. I didn't care. She was no longer my concern. As I walked out of the courthouse, I breathed deeply, the crisp air filling my lungs. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The weeks following the finalization of the divorce were surreal. Life moved forward, but I often felt like I was navigating a foreign landscape. The kids adapted better than I expected, resilient in a way that gave me strength. Ava asked fewer questions, and Sam's innocent laughter became the soundtrack of my evenings. Still, there was a quiet void in the corners of my days, a reminder of what I'd lost, or perhaps what I'd been freed from. Mia, on the other hand, had seemingly disappeared. I heard snippets through mutual acquaintances. She had moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, picked up freelance work, and spent most of her time alone. Greg was out of the picture. Clara had ensured that his life unraveled as efficiently as mine had. Last I heard, he'd left town, slinking away in disgrace. I thought the chapter was closed. The legal battles were over, and the storm had passed. I was wrong. It started with a letter. Not an email, not a text, a physical letter, written in Mia's elegant handwriting and left in my mailbox. I found it one evening after work, nestled between bills and junk mail. My name was scrawled on the envelope, nothing else. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Kurt. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Please meet me at the park by the lake, where we used to take the kids. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. I owe you this much. Mia." I stared at the letter, my pulse quickening. What could she possibly have left to say? Part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it away, to continue the clean break I had worked so hard to create. But another part, the part that still remembered the good years, was curious. And maybe, just maybe, I needed closure as much as she did. The park was quiet when I arrived, the sun casting golden hues across the lake. I spotted Mia sitting on a bench near the water, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked different, thinner, more fragile. The confident air she once carried was gone, replaced by something heavier. She stood as I approached, offering a tentative smile. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond, just nodded and sat down on the bench, leaving space between us. "What is it, Mia?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting together. "I know I've done terrible things, Kurt. I've hurt you in ways I can't ever take back. But there's something you don't know, something I've kept from you for years." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ava isn't yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, the world tilted, the steady rhythm of my heartbeat faltering. "What?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "It was before we got married. I had a one-night stand, a stupid, meaningless mistake. I found out I was pregnant a few months later. By then, you and I were serious, and I convinced myself it didn't matter. You were the better man, the one who would be a good father. I told myself I was doing the right thing, but I was selfish, Kurt. I was so selfish." I stood abruptly, the weight of her confession crashing down on me. "How could you keep this from me? For all these years?" "I was scared," she sobbed. "I didn't want to lose you. And then Ava was born, and you were so good with her. She adores you, Kurt. You're her father in every way that matters." I turned away, staring out at the water as anger and heartbreak swirled within me. "And Sam? Is he mine?" "Yes," she said quickly. "He's yours. I swear." I closed my eyes, trying to process the enormity of what she had just told me. Ava wasn't mine. The little girl I had raised, taught to ride a bike, comforted through nightmares, she wasn't mine. But then again, wasn't she? Biology didn't change the love I felt for her. And yet, Mia's betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. "Why now?" I asked, turning back to face her. "Why tell me this now?" She wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "Because I've lost everything, Kurt. And I couldn't live with myself knowing I'd lied to you about this, too. You deserve the truth." I stood there, staring at the woman I had once loved, now a stranger in so many ways. The urge to walk away was overwhelming, but something stopped me. Ava. Whatever her origin, she was my daughter. She always would be. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out what this means, for me and for Ava. But I'm done with you, Mia. Don't contact me again." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I walked away, leaving her alone on the bench as the sun dipped below the horizon. That night, I sat in Ava's room, watching her sleep. Her soft breathing, her tiny hand clutching the stuffed bear I'd given her when she was a toddler, none of it had changed. She was still the little girl who called me daddy, who trusted me to be her protector and guide. Whatever Mia had done, it didn't change who Ava was or the bond we shared. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Mia's mistakes dictate the rest of my life. I would continue to be Ava's father, in every sense of the word. She didn't need to know the truth, not yet, maybe not ever. She needed stability, love, and the unwavering support of the man who had been there for her every step of the way. As for Mia, her chapter in my life was closed for good. I'd let her truth come too late to matter.